All right, let's get right to it. Our topic today, we're really covering two different topics. One is this incredible resilience of the stock market, which we're all thrilled to see. And then asking the question, is the war really almost over? So let's jump right into the stock market. The S&P 500, which is the main index that most investors follow, it's really the sort of the US benchmark. It reached a low for the year on March 30th. At that point, the stock market was down by 10% from the all-time high that was reached on January 27th of this year. So between January 27th and February 27th, the market, so that was between January 27th when we reached the all-time high and February 27th, the market was incredibly volatile. There were a lot of concerns about AI and AI being overvalued and AI disrupting other segments of the economy, most importantly, software companies. So we were swinging violently up and down. But by the time we reached February 27th, the market was down by just 1% for the year. Okay, so as of February 27th, 2026, the S&P 500 was down 1% for 2026. And then the war erupted the next day on February 28th. And between February 28th and March 30th, which was the low point for the S&P 500, the S&P 500 dropped another 9% due to the war, and most specifically due to rising oil prices. Then, from that low point set on March 30th, beginning on March 31st through yesterday, so over the course of 12 trading days, the stock market gained 10.9%. And now if you include today at noon, the stock market is up by over 12%, about 12.3, 12.4%, making new all-time highs yet again. And now, as of, again, just before we started this call, the S&P 500 is up by 4.1% this year. Our portfolio that we have here at Greystone in the inner circle, we're up by about 5.1%. So we're outperforming the benchmark by about one full percentage point, which is very good. I'm quite happy about that. If the S&P 500 were to continue to rise at the same rate that it's increased up until right this moment, we will see a gain of 13% for the entire year for all of 2026. And if our portfolio were to continue to perform as it's performed up until this very moment, our portfolio would be up by about 14.5% for the entire year. Now that's, an interesting projection, but you can never, really necessarily make those sort of straight line projections, but it's just an interesting statistic. Furthermore, it would leave the S&P 500 at about 7,900. Okay. Again, if we were just to do a straight line comparison. Now, my forecast for where the S&P 500 would close in 2026 was 8,000. And I got to tell you, as of a few weeks ago, I thought hitting 8,000 was probably a bit of a pipe dream, but now it's looking not that far-fetched. So I'm not going to change it. So again, if we were to do a straight line projection from where we are now, the S&P 500 would close at about 7,900, not far off from my own forecast that had been 8,000. So all that is to say that we're doing okay, aren't we? And quite a bit better than what the media has warned us about. Now, the best oil analysts on Wall Street when this war broke out, oil analysts from JP Morgan to Goldman Sachs to Citibank to Bank of America, all of them were saying that because of the war, oil prices were headed towards somewhere between 150 a barrel to 200 a barrel. And I have read over and over again from very high level analysts that we are experiencing the worst oil crisis in history. Where are oil prices right now as we speak compared to what all the forecasters were saying, 150 to 200? Oil prices at this very moment are about $85. $86. So we're way below these really negative case scenarios, which all the experts were forecasting. The other thing we read over and over again, and the reason why investors were so incredibly pessimistic about the market, was America is losing the war. Well, let's talk about what losing a war might look like. Well, let's take a look at our enemy in this war, Iran. Losing the war means having your president eliminated and all his top advisors eliminated. Not only eliminated, but eliminated in the first 2 or 3 minutes of the war. Losing a war also means, again, if we're looking at it from the standpoint of our enemy, that the Air Force has been wiped out. The Navy is sitting at the bottom of the sea. The missile defense system has been entirely collapsed, pretty much. Major industries in the economy have been wiped out. In the case of Iran, their two major economies are their cement sector and their petrochemical sector. Those have been essentially destroyed. That's losing, right? And that didn't happen to us. It happened to Iran. But all the experts in our media say that we're losing. And in fact, they're saying that Trump is the one cowering and chickening out, and that's why he's rushing to the negotiating table. But would the stock market be soaring if we were losing? If our president were the one that had been eliminated, if our Air Force had been decimated and our Navy sitting at the bottom of the sea, does anyone dare think that our stock market would be soaring and setting three new all-time highs 3 consecutive days in a row? No, of course not. The pundits, the economists, the geopolitical strategists, Wall Street, the media, they all have told us that we're headed for a calamity. And if we were headed for a calamity, and if we are headed for a calamity, how in the world is our stock market rising and making new all-time highs, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense. So the question is, how is it that all these experts have read the room so badly, have misread the environment, have misread the war, got oil prices so badly wrong? Well, I think there's 2 explanations. The first explanation I would call is innocent. They're just not very good at geopolitical analysis. And I think that's true. I think the Wall Streeters, and I know this for a fact because I worked on Wall Street for over 30 years, they're just not good at geopolitical analysis. And I'm talking even the best of the best are not good at geopolitics, and they're not good at analyzing war. And just to give you a quick example, and I think I've mentioned this before, the best hedge fund manager, probably of all times and certainly of modern times, is a man by the name of Stan Druckenmiller, who I have immense respect for. Immense respect for. Um, he stated publicly just a couple days before the war broke out that he was shorting the U.S. dollar. Okay, and I'm just giving him as an example, someone who I admire greatly, as you know, the best of the best is not good at geopolitical analysis and understanding war. How could you be short the dollar when a war is about to break out? And if he actually knew that a war was about to break out, he wouldn't be short the dollar. But for some reason, he was completely misreading the tea leaves. As you all know, we were long the dollar. Well, those of you in the currency program know that we were long the dollar for actually many weeks going into the war, because for among those reasons, we were very confident that a war was going to break out, and we wanted to be long the dollar going into that, and we were short the euro against the dollar. So Druckenmiller had the exact opposite position on that we did. Now, again, I'm just giving this as an example to show you how poorly the best investors on Wall Street, how poorly they are at geopolitical analysis and understanding war. For whatever reason, he thought Trump was bluffing. He thought Trump was going to taco, right? Trump always chickens out. He thought Trump was pounding his chest, but at the end of the day, it was a big bluff. Now, why is Wall Street so bad at geopolitical analysis? Well, a big reason is that they outsource their geopolitical analysis to institutions that are professional geopolitical strategists. There's a man by the name of Ian Bremmer who has a organization called Eurogroup, and he provides most of the geopolitical analysis for Wall Street, for the hedge fund community, as well as for the Wall Street banks. And if he's not their consultant, they're paying someone else a lot like Ian Bremmer, probably academics that were trained at Ivy League institutions, some of the best institutions in the United States. And most of these guys who are the consultants to Wall Street on geopolitics, they have PhDs from the finest schools in international relations. But the thing is, most of them, 95% of them, are Trump haters, and they just can't analyze properly because their views are so distorted by their dislike for Trump. So that's a problem. That's a problem. But again, I'm calling the mistakes made by Wall Street and the hedge funds, I'm calling this an innocent mistake. But then there are also those who commit more sinister mistakes, right? And their bad analysis is simply a result of them being cheerleaders for the bad actors. They cheerlead for Iran. They cheerlead for China. Why? Because it's because they intentionally, they dislike Trump deeply. But beyond that, it's even deeper than that. They really embrace left-wing ideology themselves, radical left-wing ideology. So truly, 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 they're cheerleading for the United States to lose. It goes beyond Trump losing. They want the United States to lose. Now, that's really hard to imagine. But I assure you it's true, and I know it's true because I went to Columbia University. I did my undergraduate degree there. I got my PhD there. I know these professors. Many of my professors that I had are now retired. They were a lot better than the crop of professors that are there now. But the professors that are there now were my classmates. And I know these guys, and they are die-hard left-wing America haters. And they want us to lose. They want us to lose. And therefore, their analysis makes believe that we're losing. They're trying to convince the American public that we are really getting beaten badly in this war. Now, so you have the innocent explanation, people who are just, bad at their job and they outsource it. And then there are those who actually are sinister and are actually cheerleading for the U.S. to lose this war. Now, you know that I've always sort of been very confident in my view that we have been doing phenomenally well in the war. And to check my analysis, I always would look at Israeli financial markets. Because if Israeli markets were doing well, then that would be a good indication that my analysis was on track, right? Because the Israelis are really close to the action. They know how the war is going. And if they believe the war is going well, they're going to buy their stock market. Their currency is going to do really well. And conversely, if the war isn't going well, then their currency would be getting clobbered and their stock market would be sinking. So every single day as a check on my own analysis and what I was hearing from the generals in the United States and what I was hearing from the generals in Israel, I'd monitor Israeli financial markets. And guess what? Very consistently, Israeli financial markets were doing quite well, especially the Israeli shekel, the currency. And you can see almost on a daily basis, the shekel is grinding stronger. And right now, it is sitting at its all-time highs against the US dollar, and not only against the US dollar, but against pretty much every currency in the world. It's gaining ground. And it has been doing so for weeks. And that is a really clear indication of how this war is going. So fine, we are winning the war. And nobody understood this, right? At least in the United States, very few people understood this. And in the financial markets, very few people understood this. Nevertheless, the Strait of Hormuz was closed for oil shipping. So oil prices did shoot up a lot, right? There's no denying that oil prices went up quite a bit. So the question is, if oil prices went up a lot, why did our stock market not do a lot worse, right? Yes, at its worst moment, it was down 10%. Then it started to recover. But most forecasters thought our stock market was going down 25, 30%, right? If you listen to the Wall Street experts, every single day they were just sort of struck. And everyone was sort of shrugging their shoulders. Why is the stock market not doing significantly worse? So I think there's two explanations, or more than two explanations. There are several explanations. But the first explanation is that we got to be honest. Trump was kind of brilliant here. Very early on in the war, right? This didn't begin today. Very early on in the war, Trump began to say that the Iranians want to make a deal with us. They're desperate. And by telling the financial markets that Iran wanted to make a deal, those people who were making bets that oil prices were just going to keep going up and up, those people hesitated, right? Those people hesitated, and that kept a cap to some extent on the price of oil, right? There's other factors as well, but that was a part of it. And again, Trump was really brilliant here. He prevented investors from really making big bets that oil was going to keep going higher and higher. And he kept the oil market probably more stable than it would have been otherwise, right? So this was a brilliant move by Trump, actually. But there are some other factors at work also that oil analysts and geopolitical strategists and economists missed. Okay. They believed this myth that we did not have a plan for the Strait of Hormuz, right? That we were caught off guard by Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz, right? And because we didn't have a plan to open up the Strait of Hormuz, they were convinced that oil was going to go to 150 or 200 a barrel. Now, I say this is a myth because, of course, we had a plan to deal with the Strait of Hormuz. And we're seeing that plan in action now, and we've been seeing it in action for about a week now. And what's the plan? The plan is that we were going to take our Navy and begin to clear the strait. We're going to remove the mines out of the waters. We were going to attack their Navy, which we did, right? We sunk their Navy. We were going to attack all their missiles and missile launchers that sit on the shores of the Strait of Hormuz, right? We have been doing this and we will continue to do this, right? We can clear the strait. And by the way, this plan was not Trump's plan. This is a plan that has been in place for decades. And I've mentioned this before when I used to work with the CIA. I had been to several war game exercises at the Pentagon with the Defense Department. And I've seen these wargaming exercises, and when a war breaks out in the Middle East, in the Persian Gulf, the first assumption is that Iran will close the Strait of Hormuz, and we have plans to deal with that. So this is a plan that was first put into place many decades ago. And every single year in their wargaming exercises, they update the plan to deal with new sophisticated technologies, and we adapt to that. We adapt to a constantly changing world, a constantly changing Iran. So this myth that we didn't have a plan is one of the reasons why they thought oil prices would jump to 250 to 200, but of course we had a plan. What else did the oil analysts and economists and geopolitical strategists miss? What else did they miss? Well, first, they missed that oil prices in inflation-adjusted terms are not all that high. In fact, if oil prices had been keeping up with the overall inflation rate over the last 30 years, a barrel of oil today would cost $115. That's actually where oil prices peaked when the war broke out, right at about 115. So 115, again, if oil for the last 30 years was keeping pace with the inflation rate of all goods and services, the peak oil price is actually where oil prices should have been. And that's well above the current price of 86 a barrel. So again, the peak price of oil early in the war of 115, that's actually not a very painful price for the economy. I know when you go fill up your car and you look at the price you're paying for gasoline, you're like, "Oy, I've never paid these prices, in years and years." But the truth is, it's not all that expensive compared to the price of carrots, compared to the price of eggs, compared to the price of a house, compared to, everything has been going up at a very rapid rate, and oil has been lagging. And all of a sudden, in a very short period of time, oil prices caught up to everything else. So bottom line, oil prices never reached anywhere close to crisis levels. So the fact that all the economists thought that 115 a barrel was going to cause such tremendous pain for the US economy, they were not looking at it correctly. Another point that the economists miss and all the other analysts miss: the US today is a net exporter of oil. That means we export more oil than we import. Now, sure, when oil prices go up, there's going to be winners in an economy and there are going to be losers in an economy, right? But overall, corporate America benefits from higher oil prices because we have a lot of oil producers in the economy. Now, prior to 2019, the United States was a net importer of oil, which means we imported more oil than we exported. And therefore, up until 2019, higher oil prices hurt our economy overall. But it's not nearly as problematic today. Again, on net, our economy, at least our corporate sector, tends to benefit from higher oil prices. So that's another point that all the pessimists missed. Another point, the United States has developed energy sources other than oil. For example, look at all the electric cars on the road. That's just an example. But we have become far more efficient in our usage of oil and gas. So if we want to quantify this, if you were to compare the US economy to the US economy in the late 1990s, we can say that the United States uses somewhere between 35 to 45% less oil and gasoline per unit of GDP than we did at that time, than we did in the late 1990s. And if you go back even earlier, if you were to go back to the 1970s when we really had a serious oil crisis, we use about 60 to 70% less energy per unit of GDP than we did during that time period. So as a consequence, we are far more resilient than ever before in our history to increases in oil prices. Okay, so the odds that a big rise in oil prices would destabilize our economy are greatly diminished from any other period in our history. Here's another point. The media and the geopolitical consultants to Wall Street have been saying that the US is in a quagmire, that it cannot escape. And as a consequence, the United States will emerge severely weakened on the global stage. The exact opposite is true. We are winning, and we are going to emerge from this war far stronger than we were on February 27th, the day before the war started. So it's very likely that the world hates us more than they did, and certainly they hate Israel more than they did, if that's possible. But you know what? The world respects and fears us a lot more. And in geopolitics, it's far, far better to be respected and feared than to be loved and disrespected. In geopolitics, respect and fear is incredibly useful. And being loved but disrespected is very dangerous. And under the Biden administration, under the Obama administration, maybe they liked us a little more, but they didn't have much respect for us. And that was a very dangerous position to be in. And that's why Iran grew so powerful. And that's why China grew so powerful. And that's why Russia grew so powerful and dangerous. Right? Trump has said many times that Russia would have never invaded Ukraine if he were president. And he's right. It's because Biden was so disrespected, Russia thought they could walk right over the United States and right into Ukraine. So shouldn't Wall Street know all of this? All the things that I just talked about? Of course they should know about it, but they don't. And that's why the professional investor class are baffled as to why the stock market is sitting at all-time highs. And it's why they're still not positioned for it. They're still not positioned appropriately for this huge rally. So we're sitting on big gains, but I assure you, the best hedge funds in the United States and throughout the world, they are still sitting in losses because they never expected this. They completely misread this situation. So everyone thought the oil spike would break the economy. It hasn't. They thought the oil spike would break corporate earnings. It won't. The war didn't break our economy. It didn't damage corporate earnings. Our stock market is on the rise again. And earlier this week, we got producer price inflation, and that data came in quite a bit lower than the economists thought. That tells you, right? That tells you the fact that they forecasted much higher inflation rates. That tells you that they didn't understand these things which we're discussing right here. They missed the boat. Now, I was pretty convinced that we were just going through a period of volatility. We weren't going through a major market downturn. And that's why we made the decision to ride through this and not move into cash, not rush to the sidelines. I want to run through some data that makes it crystal clear that if you don't know what, I did have a strong view, but even if you don't have a strong view, and if you get nervous that the markets are tumbling, the best thing to do is just to hold on tight, don't sell. I just want to run through some data. I'm going to give you the S&P 500 returns from moments when the market had sharp downturns. Let's go to Liberation Day. That was April 8th of 2025, last year. The stock market is up by about 42% since that moment. Okay, 42%. How many people jumped in cash when Trump announced those tariffs and the market just ended up going down, but then it rocketed back? And we've risen by 42% since then. Another dangerous, the prior dangerous moment in the stock market was 2022, when the Fed started to raise interest rates aggressively due to rising inflation. The stock market in 2022 dropped at one point by 20%. But since that point, the stock market has rallied back by 105%. 105%. So all the people who got frightened and all the experts were telling you run to cash, the market has ripped. And if you just rode through the storm, you'd be looking very pretty right now. What about COVID? The COVID crisis. The stock market during the COVID crisis, by mid-March of 2020, the stock market had dropped by 33%. Well, since that time in 2020, the stock market is up by 238%. All the experts again said, rush to the sidelines, run for cover. If you had done nothing, you'd be up by 238% by now. There's a crisis that perhaps you don't know about. It was the European debt crisis that happened in 2011. Another global event that the experts said, run to the sidelines, hide, this is a complete disaster coming. Since that time, the stock market is up by 715%. And then finally, the crisis of all crises, the great financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. Even if you just closed your eyes, said, I'm just going to hold on tight, which I didn't do, by the way. I didn't do that. I actually shorted that market. Um, but if you didn't, if you rode through it, the gain since that time is 1,300%. 1,300%. If you just rode through that storm. So that goes to show you, don't let the gurus frighten you. Because if they do, and you rush to cash, you'll be making a horrible mistake, right? You'll be making a horrible mistake, and you will miss monster, monster, monster stock market rallies. It's okay to fall by 10% when the gain is going to be multiples of that. Okay, now let's turn to the war. So, beginning a couple days ago, and really, even more so today, Trump is expressing extreme optimism that a deal is at hand. He says that Iran has agreed to give up its enriched uranium. It's promised not to enrich uranium in the future, which means a complete surrender of its nuclear program. Furthermore, Trump has pressed Israel to enter into a ceasefire with Lebanon, really with Hezbollah, because Israel does not have any war with Lebanon. It's with Hezbollah, which occupies Lebanon. But so that ceasefire is underway. What's going on? What's going on? Well, Trump is either gullible. That's one possibility, that he's being fooled by the Iranian regime. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that he's playing games with the Iranians. Trump sees himself as the ultimate deal maker, and he's just playing games with them. Or he really has a deal, right? So there's three possibilities. Trump is gullible and he's being played. I don't think that's very likely. He's got something up his sleeve and he's playing games with them, right? And he's several steps ahead of them and everyone else. And he and possibly Netanyahu are laying a trap for Iran that nobody's been thinking about. Or maybe Trump really does have a deal, right? I find it hard to believe that Trump really has a deal. I can't imagine that the Iranian regime is anything other than a fanatical Islamist death cult committed to the destruction of Israel and ultimately to the United States. But we're going to find out. We're going to find out in the coming days and in the coming weeks. For days now, Iran has been hiding behind the same excuse. They've been saying that they refuse to talk on the nuclear issue or any of the other issues. They will not open the Strait of Hormuz until Israel concedes to a ceasefire with Lebanon. Okay? So what did we get? Well, yesterday we got the announcement that Israel has agreed to a ceasefire with Lebanon. What's that about? Why is Trump making Israel commit to a ceasefire with Hezbollah? Right? Hezbollah is an aggressor. It doesn't seem to me, why is Trump allowing Iran to dictate whether they show up to the negotiating table or not? Right? That's a weird thing to concede. Right? You're letting the Iranians call the shots? Well, it's possible that Trump has actually flipped the table on Iran. He's saying to them, and I'm speculating, I'm hypothesizing, I don't know any of this for sure, but I'm trying to read Trump. Maybe he's flipping the table on the Iranians, saying, you want a ceasefire in Lebanon? Here it is. You got your ceasefire. Now what? If that was the real obstacle, if the fighting between Iran and Hezbollah, which the Hezbollah obviously is behind it. They're attacking Israel constantly. Israel is only defending itself. Well, if that's what you want, if that's the real obstacle, fine, you got your ceasefire. But now, Iran, you have no cover anymore. So Iran either engages in negotiations seriously and they give Trump what he wants, or if they don't, give Trump what he wants, Iran is exposed. Trump exposes Iran in the sense that Lebanon was never the real issue to begin with. And that probably explains why Netanyahu was so quick to accept the ceasefire. He understands what Trump is doing. They've discussed it. These guys plan everything in this war. They're completely coordinated. So you might think it looks like Trump is pushing Israel around here, and I'm sure Trump is happy to give that impression for a couple reasons. One reason is he's showing Iran, see, I'm being impartial here. I'm twisting Israel. I'm twisting their arm. So I'm giving you what you want. Trump is also showing people in America who say, you do whatever Israel wants you to do. He's showing the world that's not the case. I'm the one calling the shots here. But he's also putting Iran up against the wall. They have no more excuses. They better give in to Trump's demands. Meanwhile, as all this is going on, this is giving the United States military time to bring more military assets into the region, and we are doing that, right? We're gearing up more, increasing our military assets. We are also continuing our blockade, so we continue to choke the Iranian economy. We continue to clear mines from the Strait of Hormuz. All of this continues to go on. We have plenty of time. We can negotiate, we can talk. Trump continues to bring oil prices down, which is good for the US economy, which is good for the global economy. Meanwhile, Iran continues to be strangled economically. Time is on our side. It's not on the Iranian side. So we are gaining more leverage. Now, based on what I'm hearing and reading from sources inside Iran, the mood inside regime circles, Iranian regime circles, is growing darker by the day. Their public messaging is very bombastic, very confident. But the reality is that for the entirety that this war has been going on, military salaries have not been able to be paid. That's a problem. There has been about $500 billion in damage to the Iranian economy. And all of that damage is pretty much targeted at what hurts the Iranian regime the most. Furthermore, there seems to be some less ideological, less radical elements inside the regime. We can call them the more pragmatic wing of the Iranian regime. And there's real tension growing between the ideologues, the radicals in Iran, in the regime, and those who are more interested in just surviving and not having problems with the United States. Those tensions are building. And I believe Trump is trying to exploit those tensions and cause a breaking within the Iranian regime, right? Trump knows what he's doing here. there seems to be evidence, right? Real evidence of these fissures growing within the regime. And the more Trump speaks about deals and allowing the Iranian regime to survive, if they behave pragmatically and reasonably, the more he probably thinks he can fracture the regime from the inside, right? The divide the ideologues from the pragmatists. Another important thing that I'm monitoring is that in the Arab world, in the Middle East, the Arab media is now portraying Trump's demand regarding Iran giving up its proxies, that it stop funding Hezbollah, that it stop funding Hamas, that it stop funding the Houthis. The Arab media is saying that this is our request. We want Trump to insist that Iran stop funding its proxies. This is brand new, right? It always used to be Israel wanted Iran to stop funding its proxy network. But now the Arab countries themselves are insisting on this. This is a new development, and it signals closer ties between the US, the Arab world, and Israel, which means that Iran is increasingly isolated. Iran was a country that was not isolated in the Arab world before this war, but today it is isolated. That's a major development, and it also probably will contribute to the fracturing inside the Iranian regime. So Trump is negotiating. That's true. He is negotiating. But he's also being very strategic in these negotiations. He's bringing in more military assets, so he's ready to fight again if need be and start striking Iran again. And he's also trying to fracture the regime from inside. In my opinion, Trump is playing this pretty brilliantly. Now, I don't have any inside information. These are my hunches, these are my hypotheses, but following the way Trump has behaved in geopolitics throughout his presidency, I think it's a pretty good bet that this is how he's playing this. Now, it's important to know that not only is the United States concentrating forces in the region, military forces in the region, but Iran, in its own way, is also preparing for a renewal of the war. They are. They are trying to reactivate missile cities that, in our bombing campaign, we basically buried a lot of these missile cities that they have. Missile cities are just storage places, and there are certain areas where we couldn't actually penetrate with our bunker buster bombs, their missile infrastructure. We just buried it with rubble. So Iran is digging out from the rubble these missile cities in order to prepare to fight again. So if these negotiations fail, which even though Trump sounds very confident today, they could fail very easily. And if they do, war escalation could happen very rapidly and very violently. And the scale of the damage that we inflict on Iran could exceed anything that we've seen so far. And Trump is ready for that, right? Trump is ready for that. And even though Iran will sustain significant more damage if we see warfare break out again, it does retain the ability to retaliate. And this can't be underestimated. And for sure, it would have an impact on the oil markets again, right? It would have an impact. We could see oil go back to $100 or over again if we return to warfare. But we can be sure that the United States would this time around hit Iran's economic interests much harder. They would for sure go after their energy, their electricity sector, right, and cripple their ability to generate electricity. We very well this time might actually destroy their oil infrastructure, right? As I mentioned in the last call, the United States can really go up the escalation ladder in a much more effective way than Iran can. There's very few things that Iran can do to hurt us. For sure, they would do some things, but we can climb the escalation ladder much further than they can. Now, this brings us back to the central strategic question. What is the actual objective of this war? If we return to war, meaning firing bullets, regime change, even though Trump might not state it explicitly, I do think that he may not say it out loud, but regime change would probably become more the focus of the war. But we can be sure that the Iranian regime is not just going to surrender and say, you know what, the next guys can take over, we're done. That's not going to happen. It's far more likely that the regime will be willing to absorb extremely heavy costs. They will not capitulate and turn power over to more moderate forces, right? That's not going to happen. There is no single military operation, no matter how large or sophisticated, that will compel the Islamic Republic to just abandon its ideological foundations on which it's built on, right? They're not going to surrender their ideology. They're not going to just hand over power to someone else. Now, can we do regime change, right? And this is all under the scenario where negotiations fall apart and we return to war. Can we do regime change versus via aerial bombing, right? And people say you can't. People say that's impossible. But they have a point. They have a point. But you absolutely can do regime change through aerial bombing when it's paired with massive economic pressure and covert aid to opposition groups and continuing to degrade the internal repression apparatus of the Iranian regime. And we will do that, right? All those factors will be at work if we return to firing bullets. Now, the tipping point for when you get real social unrest from the Iranian people, it's hard to know exactly when you're going to get social uprisings, right? If we can, we look at the long history of social uprisings that end up toppling regimes, even with a careful study of successful uprisings, it's still almost impossible to know what will trigger a massive uprising that leads to success. Iran has had many uprisings through its history. It had uprisings in 1999, student protests. It had another uprising in 2009 when the regime stole presidential elections. It had another uprising in 2017 and 2018 due to protests against a failing economy and corruption. We had protests again in 2022 and 2023 when a Muslim woman was arrested for not wearing her hijab on her head. She was arrested and ultimately killed, and that led to huge uprisings led by women. And then again, of course, the most recent and largest uprisings, which took place in December of last year and January of this year, as Iranians were protesting a collapsing economy, a devaluation of their currency, and taking advantage of the 12-day war and a weakening of the regime. So these factors have all gotten much more severe, right? The economy in Iran has never been in worse shape. The regime has never been weaker than it is today. The Iranian population has never been more upset, angered with the mistreatment, the murder of innocent civilians. So it would seem that the time is right for the people to rise up. If Trump and Netanyahu tell people to take to the streets. So, it does seem like, if these negotiations fall apart, this regime seems very fragile, and we are going to hit them hard and do all we can to bring about regime change. Now, I just want to say a word about, just going back to all the critics of Trump around the world, in the United States and around the world. Our academics, all the economists and strategists who are those who are sort of rooting on Iran, or even those who aren't necessarily rooting on Iran, but aren't supporting our war effort. There's a concept that evil's best weapon, evil's greatest weapon, is cowardice. Evil cannot exist unless cowardice exists. It makes sense, right? If the world weren't so cowardly, this evil regime in Iran would have been wiped out very quickly after it took power in 1979, right? It could have been destroyed before they had any power whatsoever. But the world is cowardly. So evil grows and it grows and it grows and it gets more dangerous. And the more dangerous evil becomes, the more cowardly the world becomes. The European Union is incredibly cowardly. They haven't lifted a finger to do anything to help us in this war. In fact, they've only put up one obstacle after another. We got to be honest. The Democratic Party rails against Trump in this war. The Democratic Party is full of cowards. Tucker Carlson and others like him, who have done nothing but criticize Trump and this war, is a complete coward. So you can say what you want about Trump, criticize him all you like, but this man is not a coward. He's confronting evil head on like no modern American president. So just to conclude, the Iranian IRGC that is running the country now, right? They're the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is their most elite military force. They're running the country. They are in full survival mode. They understand that their economy is reeling. They understand that they've been terribly weakened militarily. Publicly, they pound the chest. They pretend they're winning. And our cowardly media echoes them, right? They echo them. They say that they are winning. But the truth is, the IRGC, the Iranian regime, they can no longer stop the United States. They can't. And they are just posturing. I'm confident that Trump is fully committed. He's all in to winning this war. And it's really the IRGC that's buying time. Now, Trump probably believes that he can use coercive diplomacy, threats. He showed them our great military power. And now he probably believes he can get them to surrender everything he wants from them at the negotiating table. Right? He's also being tactical. He's trying to fracture the regime from within. But I think we shouldn't be mistaken. If Trump doesn't get what he wants from the negotiating table, he will return to force if necessary. So, for those who think that Trump is just throwing in the towel here, trying to get a quick win, I very much doubt that's the case. I mean, I shouldn't say a quick win, a fake win, a fake win. I think Trump would love a quick win, but a fake win, I don't think that's the direction he's headed. All right. Um, we've done an hour. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take them. And if not, we can call it a day. All right. Doesn't look like we have questions. Guys, I hope that was interesting and helpful. And we will be back at it again on next week. Have a great weekend, everybody. It's going to be an exciting weekend. Negotiations, by the way, are scheduled well, tentatively scheduled for Sunday. That's not official yet, but we shall see. All right, everybody. Have a good one.